In part 1, she glowed. She gave everything. She completed her purpose. In part 2, fear cast him out. The wolves bowed. The forest claimed him. In part 3, the wild raised him. 4 seasons, 4 lessons, 1 destiny. Now, part 4, he is ready. The village is broken and the door between 2 worlds is about to open. 3 years had passed since the boy sat at the mill and understood what he was for. 3 years since Serafine pressed her great head to his shoulder in the answer that needed no words. In those 3 years, he had not been idle. He had learned everything the forest had left to teach him. He had learned the language of roots and rivers. He had learned to read the wind the way Serafine read it, not just for weather but for meaning, for the feeling tone of the world beyond the tree line. He had learned that his hands could heal, that his voice could reach the sky, that his wings, fully grown now, enormous and luminous and impossible, were not for escaping the world but for crossing it. And across the black water of the mere, the village was dying, not in fire, not in war, in the slow quiet way that places die when they have lost their connection to something ancient and essential. The river was grey, the fields were thin, the children had stopped laughing in the roads. Dorak the blacksmith, old now, slower, carrying 12 years of a decision he could never undo, sat at his cold forge every morning and stared into nothing. The village was waiting for something, though no one knew that. The forest knew, and it was time. The river had been the first sign. 3 years ago it had begun to slow, imperceptibly at first, then undeniably. The water that had once run clear and fast and cold enough to keep the fish fat and silver year-round had turned grey-green and sluggish, as though something upstream had changed, something deep and old that no survey of the banks could locate. The fisherman pulled empty nets. The women who watched close at the riverside came home with a smell on the fabric that no amount of drying in the wind could entirely remove. The children were forbidden from swimming in it, and the village elder, a man who had seen 70 winters and prided himself on having a practical explanation for everything, stood at the bank one grey afternoon and admitted quietly to himself that he had no explanation for this. The fields followed the river. The first harvest had been thin, the second had been worse. By the third year, the village was not starving, not yet, but the particular arithmetic of winter stores versus mouths to feed was becoming a calculation that kept the elder awake at night. The soil itself seemed different, less alive, less willing, as though something beneath it, some ancient generosity in the deep earth, had quietly withdrawn. The farmers knew their fields the way they knew their own hands, and they knew something was wrong that no amount of additional seed or amended soil could fix. Something was wrong underneath. Something was wrong at the roots. Dorak was old now, not ancient, but worn, the way iron gets worn when it has been worked too hard for too long without proper tempering. His hands, those great skilled blacksmith hands that had shod every horse and mended every hinge and forged every blade in the village for 30 years, sat open and still on his knees in front of a forge he had not lit in 3 days, not because there was no work, because there was no point to the stillness he could find in the dark of the workshop that he couldn't find anywhere else. His wife had been dead for 12 years. He had never remarried. He had never spoken of the child to anyone except the elder once on the morning after, and never again. But every morning when he dressed, he put the leather pouch around his neck, and every night when he lay down, he felt the weight of it against his chest, small, impossibly light, and heavier than anything he had ever lifted. The council wanted practical solutions. More seed from the Eastern Trading Post, a new well dug deeper, prayer service 3 times a week instead of 1. The elder listened to all of it with the prescience of someone who had stopped expecting the right answer to come from the expected direction. He stood at his window after they had all gone home and looked at the dark line of the forest on the horizon. He had been thinking about the night 12 years ago, the night the whole village went white with light and every dreamer dreamed of gold. He had been thinking about the feather Dorak had shown him the next morning. He had been thinking about the old stories. The words his grandmother had told him that her grandmother had told her about the covenant between the village and the forest and the sacred thing that lived in the space between them. He had been thinking about all of it for 3 years, and he was beginning to believe, quietly, carefully, the way old men believe things that they know no one else is ready to hear yet, that the solution to the village dying was not going to come from a deeper well. He rose before the park on the morning he had chosen. He climbed to the highest ridge in Wolf Park, the place where on clear days you could see both the deep forest stretching away to the north and the village and its fields spread out to the south. He spread his wings into the sunrise. He stood there for a long time, not hesitating, not delaying, but completing something, saying thank you to the only home he had ever known, in the only language that home had ever used. Presence, full, unhurried, grateful presence. He looked at the silver trees below, the black river catching the gold of the morning. The wolf trailed through the last snow, every lane he had ever run, every tree he had ever touched, every winter night he had ever sung to the lights and felt them answer. He held all of it in his chest for one long breath. Then he let it settle into the place where the things you carry forever live, and he turned south. They walked with him. Of course they did. The whole pack, from the oldest wolf to the youngest pup. Finn on his left, Kyle on his right. The boy walked between them the way he had walked between them his entire life. Held but not held back. Protected but not contained. He could feel their warmth on both sides. He could feel the weight of everything they had given him moving through his body like a current. The patience of Serafine, the wisdom of Kel, the wilderness of the juvenile, the ancient memory of the forest itself carried in all of them. He had been given more than any child born in any village had ever been given, and now he was going to spend it. Ancient and certain and full of every winter they had shared, held this without blinking. The boy put his hand on his chest, over the place where the lights lived. Kai dipped his great carried hair. Once, slower, and the boy turned back to the river. He stepped into the cold black water. He crossed. He did not look back again, not because he didn't want to, because some crossings, if you are going to make them completely, have to be made without looking back. He knew this. Serafine had taught him. The village saw the wolves first. It was midday, which was wrong because wolves don't come at midday. Everyone knew that, and they didn't hide. They stood at the tree line in full daylight, a long silent line of them, watching the village with the collective calm of something that has been patient for a long time, and is patient still. The villagers gathered at the gates. Someone reached for a pitchfork. The elder put his hand on the man's arms without looking at him. Put it down, he said quietly. Look at them. They looked. The wolves were not stalking. They were not pacing. They were standing the way sentinels stand, not threatening, not retreating, witnessing, as though they had come to watch something happen that they had always known was going to happen and wanted to be present for. The elder felt something move in his chest, something old and almost forgotten. Wait, he said to the village, just wait. And then they saw him, walking out of the grey morning across the first covered field, barefoot, which nobody noticed at first because everything else about him made barefoot seem like the least remarkable thing. The wings they noticed immediately. White, enormous, folded against his back with the casual ease of someone who has worn them his entire life and forgotten that the world might find them unusual. His face, young but not young, the way the face of someone raised by ancient things is never entirely young. His eyes, dark and patient, and carrying something that made the people at the gate feel inexplicably as though they were the ones being welcomed rather than him. And behind him, trailing from each bare footsteps in the frost, green, small, impossible, satin green shoots pushing up through the frozen ground, a trail of new life following him across the dead field like a signature. The elder at the gate put both hands over his mouth. His eyes filled. He had read the old stories. He knew exactly what he was looking at. The village went completely silent when he walked through the gate. Not the silence of fear, though there was fear in some of the faces. The silence of a crowd of people all experiencing the same thing at the same moment and none of them having words for it. He stood inside the gate and let them look. He was patient. He had been raised by creatures who understood what presence, real presence, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself, works best when it is given time. The children were the first to stop being afraid. They always are. A small girl at the front of the crowd, perhaps 4 years old, took 3 steps forward and looked up at him with the direct, uncomplicated assessment that only very young children and very old wolves can manage. Your wings are white, she said. He looked down at her. Yes, he said. She considered this. Are you cold? He almost smiled. No, he said. Are you? She shook her head, and then she reached up and took his hand. He went to the well first. He knelt beside it and pressed both palms flat to the earth, and the village watched white light pour from his hands into the ground. They watched it run through the air towards the well's deep roots. They watched the water rise, felt it before they saw it, a deep vibration under their feet, as though something sleeping far below had been woken by a sound it recognized. And then the water came, clean, clear, cold and fast, surging up from somewhere deep and pure, and untouched by whatever had been slowly poisoning the surface. It overflowed the well's rim and ran along the old stone channels that the village founders had built 300 years ago. Channels that had sat dry and clogged for 3 years, running clean water into the fields. Someone in the crowd began to cry, not sad cry, the other kind, the kind that happens when something you had stopped believing in turns out to be real. Then he walked the fields. Every field he took most of the afternoon. He walked each row barefoot in the frost, and where his feet touched the earth, the green came, not slowly, not eventually, but immediately and undeniably. Shoots pushing through frozen ground, roots stretching downward into new warm soil, life returning to places that had forgotten how to hold it. The villagers followed him at a distance, farmers walking their own rows, watching the impossible happen and not quite believing it even as they watched it. The children ran ahead, trying to find the next footprint before it bloomed from above, from the ridge where a hawk circled in the golden afternoon light. The fields must have looked extraordinary, a grey world being painted green from the inside out, one bare footsteps at a time. He saw the old man at the edge of the crowd. He would have known him anywhere, not from memory. He had been hours old when they last shared the same air, but from the roots, from the 12 years of touching the boundary oak and the feeling through the earth, the specific weight of a man carrying a specific thing that had never been put down, he turned his head. Their eyes met across the crowd, and Dorak, this man of iron and silence and practical certainty, this man who had not cried at his wife's funeral, who had not cried when he carried the child to the forest, who had kept the leather pouch against his chest for 12 years like a wound he kept reopening because he felt that he deserved the pain, stopped moving. His face did something complicated and terrible and entirely human. 12 years came to the surface all at once. Dorak's knees gave out before he reached him. He didn't plan it. His body simply gave. 12 years of carrying something too heavy. Finally finding the floor, he went down in the middle of the village square, on the cold cobblestones, his great scared hands on the ground, and his head bowed and no words, because there were no words sized correctly for this. There had never been words sized correctly for this. The boy walked to him. He stood before the old man and looked at him for a moment. They really looked, the way his mother had looked at things, with full attention and without judgment. Then he placed one hand on the old man's shoulder. The light came gently. It didn't blaze. It didn't overwhelm. It simply settled, warm and steady and patient, the way Seraphine's body warmth had settled around him in the oak roots on his first night in the world. She didn't blame you, the boy said quietly. His voice was low and certain and carried no performance in it whatsoever. She knew what you were made of. She loved the parts of it that weren't fear. Dorak made a sound that had no name. The cobblestones beneath him were words. Dorak reached into his collar with shaking hands and pulled out the leather pouch. He held it out, offering it back. the silver
Peace be
feather,
with
the
you.
12-year wait,
Thank you.
the nightly reminder of a decision made from fear. The boy looked at the
Peace be
pouch
with
in the
you.
old man's trembling
Thank
hand.
you.
Then he reached out and closed both of his own hands around the
Peace
old
be
man's
with you.
hand, around the
Thank you.
pouch and the head together, and held them. He
Peace
didn't
be
take
with
the
you.
feather. He
Thank you.
didn't need to. Keep it, he said, not as a punishment, as
Peace
a
be with
reminder
you.
that you came back,
Thank you.
that you told the truth, that this morning you are here and you stayed.
Peace
He
be
squeezed
with
the
you.
old man's hands
Thank
once,
you.
firmly, the way his mother would have. Then he stood.
Peace be with
Dorak
you.
sat on the cold
Thank you.
cobblestone for a long moment. Then slowly, with the particular dignity
Peace
of
be
a
with
man
you.
who has just had
Thank
something
you.
very heavy lifted off him and is still adjusting to the new lightness,
Peace be with
he
you.
stood too. Mother found him at the end of the afternoon, sitting on the steps of the village hall, watching the village move, watching the children who had come back to the roads, the women carrying clean water from the well, the farmers standing in their fields looking at the new green shoes with the specific expression of people who have been giving back something they thought was gone for good. The elder sat down beside him without ceremony. They were quiet together for a while. Then the elder said, "What are you?" Not unkindly, genuinely, the way a man asks a question when he has been waiting his whole life for the right moment to ask it. The boy thought about this for a long time. Then he said, "A door between what you are and what you come from, between what you built and what was here before you built it." He tilted his head towards the forest on the horizon. They are not your enemy. They have never been your enemy. They are your memory, the part of you that lived before you learned to be afraid. The elder was quiet for a long time. Then will you stay? The boy looked at the forest, then at the village. I'll be in both, he said. That's what the dog does. At dusk, the whole village came to the field, not because anyone organized it, because something pulled them there. The way things pull people towards what is true and large and just beyond their full understanding. They gathered at the meadow's edge and faced the forest, and the forest slowly in the last cold of the sunset gave back. The wolves came forward, not to the tree line, into the field, into the open, into the light, into the full sight of every human eye. Serafine first, then Kyle, then the park flowing out behind them like a slow dark tide, spreading through the field, filling the space between the trees and the village until the two worlds were separated by nothing but 50 years of sunsets, grass, and whatever was left of the old fear. The boy stood in the center of it all, between the wolves he had been raised by and the humans he had come to heal, between the world that had called him cursed and the world that had always known who he was, right where he had always been meant to stand. He turned to the village. He stood in the golden light between the wolves and the humans, and he spoke, not in a grand voice, not performing anything, just speaking the way Kyle had always communicated with him, directly, clearly, with the absolute confidence of someone who knows what they know. He told them who the wolves were, what they had kept, what they had carried in their songs for 1,000 years. He told them about the covenant, not the fearful old version of it. The covenant of keep your distance and stay afraid, but the real one, the original one, the one made before the first world was ever built, the one that said you are of the same earth, you breathe the same air. What happens to the wide happens to you. What happens to you happens to the wide. There is no separation. There has never been a separation. There is only the forgetting and the remembering. He gestured behind him as Serafine and cried, "They raised me," he said simply. "Everything I know about who I am, they taught me, and everything I know about who you are, they carried it for you while you forgot." It was the small girl who crossed first, the same girl who had taken his hand at the gate that morning and asked him if he was cold. She had been watching Serafine from the moment the wolves came into the field, with that particular 4-year-old assessment that has no filter and no fear because it hasn't been taught fear yet. She walked forward through the grass. Her mother made a small sound behind her. The boy put his hand up slightly. He saw right without turning. The girl stopped in front of Serafine. She looked up at the great wolf. Serafine looked down at the girl, And then the girl did what the boy had done on his very first day in the park. She reached out her hand. Serafine lowered her great grey head until her nose met the shy's fingers. The girl laughed, the same open-mouthed, full-bodied, entirely unself-conscious laugh of a child who has just discovered something wonderful. Behind her, in the gathered village, an old farmer began to weep. He didn't know why. He didn't need. The evening came, the stars came, and in the middle between the forest and the village, in the space that had been a border for generations and was becoming a bridge, something began that had not existed in that valley for a very long time. People and wolves together in the same field, in the same air, in the same first fragile hours of a trust that would take years to fully build but had, in this evening, found its foundation. Dorak stood at the edge of the meadow, holding the leather pouch open in his palm, not clutching it, not wearing it, just holding it out in the open evening air, as though letting it breathe for the first time. The boy stood in the center of it all and looked up at the sky. The first stars were appearing, and from deep in the forest carried on the evening wind across the mere and the fields, the sound of the northern lights beginning, green and gold at the edge of the horizon.